Hello, and welcome to The Next Level with Julie Hruska, where we talk all about how you can take your life to the next level in the areas of career, relationships, health, and finance. Today, I have an amazing expert in valuation. He's an author, he's a TV host, and I'm so excited to share him with you today. Dave Bookbinder, welcome to the show.
Hey, Julie, thanks so much for having me.
So Dave, there are so many things that you do. And one of the things that you've done recently is written a series of books called The New ROI. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, so the backstory is, in my professional world, I'm a valuation consultant. So I've helped companies in valuing their businesses and their intellectual property assets, their intangibles. And one of those intangible assets that I valued is people, human capital. And I frankly never thought that our profession had the right methodology to value people appropriately, in my view. And I wrote an article about it, just explaining how we do it and how I thought maybe we could do a little bit better job. Being careful not to throw stones at my profession, right?
Of course.
And not to throw stones at the accounting profession. Let me pause there for a quick second. Let me ask you and your audience. So every CEO on the planet says, our people are this company's most valuable asset, right?
Absolutely.
Where do those people appear on a financial statement?
Nowhere.
Exactly, they don't. So I wrote an article and people just told me that there's more to be done here, keep going. So I wound up writing a few articles, and long story short, it needed to be aggregated, and it turned into what is now book one. And book two, which just dropped in October, is called The New ROI, Going Behind the Numbers. And that's a compendium of the conversations that I've had on my show here, Behind the Numbers, where I've had various thought leaders and experts talking about the value that people contribute to the enterprise. So the whole series is about demonstrating that people really are a company's most valuable asset.
And they truly are. What I find in my high performance coaching is that I work with individuals to help them become their best selves and to really amplify their skill set and all of the things that they need to become leaders in their industries. But what I find is when I work with one person, then we have to deal with the culture of the company. And so I got into training different companies on high-performing cultures because human capital is really what it's all about. So when you think about human capital, how do you measure it?
Well, the way we measure it technically, in my world, I don't want to get too wonky here and bore your audience, but when a company acquires another business, the intangibles and the fixed assets and real estate are put on the balance sheet at their fair value. So when we value human capital, it's in the context of that accounting exercise, and we value people only from the standpoint of basically calculating a rental charge, if you will, against other assets. So for instance, if we're valuing customer relationship assets, the idea there is that you can't have a valuable customer relationship asset without people serving them, for example. So we value the workforce, calculate the rental expense to charge against the customer relationship asset, and then, for those who are interested, people wind up in goodwill.
Okay, so renting people sounds a little bit like, what does that mean?
Well, in the same way that you would have working capital expenses and things like that associated with servicing a customer relationship. So it's one of those contributory assets is the term of art that we use.
Right. So when you look at that and you're valuing human capital, how do you consider things like loyalty and appreciation and those type of things?
Great question, and the answer is in the valuation world we don't, and in the accounting world we don't. So I'm on a mission to change that conversation because there is real value in that. What you describe is what I call the intangible within the intangible, right? So in our world, when we value the workforce, we're looking at a cost to replace. So everybody is basically assumed to be fungible. One person's just as good as the next, as good as the next. And we don't consider things like how engaged are those employees. And you and I both know, and your audience certainly knows, that engaged employees are more valuable than the disengaged. And the toxic employees are less valuable, and so forth. So we're not capturing any of that. And even the nuanced stuff, like institutional knowledge. So you've experienced it before, right? Somebody leaves the organization, they write down their whole position description, what they do. Then they're gone and like, holy cow, I didn't know she did that.
Right.
All the stuff that just walks out the door that's in their brain, like even as simple as, I know when to ask Julie for something based on Julie's mood, for example.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And those are the things when you hear things like, oh, everyone's replaceable. That's not really true. You have to think about everyone's valuable, and how valuable are they is a lot more than what's on paper.
Yeah, exactly.
And so when we look at human capital and the way that people are hiring or firing or laying off, if we want to be nicer about it. What do you advise leaders of organizations to do?
In terms of how to navigate the whole recruitment retention process?
Yes.
Well, I think it's a mindset, and I've interviewed a lot of CEOs to talk about what's been the difference maker for them as they've emphasis on intentionally made culture change. And consistently they tell me it takes about 18 to 24 months to fully implement that culture change, where people really take it seriously. In other words, it's not just another fad like we've done before, where we put the ping pong table in the break room or had free pizza on Fridays for lunch. That we're serious about it.
Right.
And the most serious are the ones that instituted the no assholes policies.
Okay.
And they've enforced them.
The
and
no assholes policy, I like that.
And it sends a strong message to the team that tells them that we're not going to tolerate bad behavior. And that's where it all begins.
Right. So when I work with companies and high-performing cultures, we start with a vision. And then we go right into from envisioning the future of the company and what the company wants to be about, paths forward, we go right into enlisting employees, because you have to have engaged employees. So when you're talking about human capital, what do the CEOs you speak with, what do they talk about as far as how they can increase employee engagement?
Yeah, that seems to be the million-dollar question, right? And everybody's got a different perspective on it. But my particular lens, from gathering all the data that I've gotten in the last 7 years and putting these things together and doing the talks that I've done, is it's really so fundamental. It's at its core, it's about just treating people with dignity, with respect, with humanity.
Right.
Give them a chance to do some kind of meaningful work, even if they're doing something that is, we'll call it task-oriented.
Right.
Help them, remind them to understand what the bigger mission is here. You know, your mission isn't, like in my world, our mission isn't to just necessarily hand a deliverable to a client and give them a report.
Right.
There's value add that we can bring along the way, and it's important that we remember to do that. So if you do those simple things, and if you think this is just woo-woo,
Right.
I can tell you that there are people who are way smarter than I who've done a lot more research on this, and they've demonstrated the correlation between things like appreciation, which I think you mentioned,
Yes.
and the impact that that has on engagement. In fact, one stat I just saw recently was that just by saying thank you, a manufacturing company increased productivity by 6%.
Wow.
Just by showing appreciation, a simple thank you.
Yes, I find when I'm working with companies, we spend a lot of time talking about empowerment and giving all of the employees that decision-making authority and helping them get the professional development and develop their competencies so they can continue to climb and ascend. So when you think about the empowerment and then you add the appreciation, that's when it really becomes a sense of, we care about you. We want you to be here. And working together toward a vision, like I started to talk about, that is the kind of bigger why. And when people can connect to the greater why, that's when they can really stay at the company, work hard, feel like they're working towards something more than just a paycheck. And that's where you increase the loyalty. That's what I see.
Yeah, look, millennials got a bad rap when they started to shine the spotlight on the need for meaningful work.
Right.
But I say here's to them, because you know what? Here's a spoiler alert. It's not just the millennials that want more meaningful work.
Right.
Everybody wants to be involved in something that has some meaning and purpose.
Right, and I think what we saw during the pandemic is the whole Great Recession, that people were unwilling to just punch a time clock. And when we had to stop, and we were at home and we had time to really contemplate what we were doing with our lives, there was a collective kind of, I don't want to say disgruntlement, I'm making up a word there, but there was a collective pullback, a collective stop where people were like, you know what, my life has to be about something more than just money.
Yeah.
And it's powerful, but the companies that aren't willing to shift to that are seeing a lot of problems. And we talked about before the show about Twitter.
Yeah.
You know, Elon Musk comes in and he created something at Tesla. He created it and he built it from the ground up. But when he acquired Twitter, he went in with that kind of attitude that the culture that was already there didn't seem to matter. He was just going to do his own thing. And then we saw so many, like this mass resignation.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the role that leaders play in the creation of a high-performing culture?
Well, it all starts at the top, right? If the leader isn't the one who is initiating it, then nothing's going to get done. And the leader has to make sure that everybody down the food chain drinks the proverbial corporate Kool-Aid.
Right.
Because I've heard stories of situations where the leader with the best intentions to do the right things got circumvented by that guy in that office who, quote, didn't get the memo and was treating his people differently. But to your point about the Great Resignation, if we learned anything at all during the global pandemic, it had to be that people really are the most valuable assets, right?
Absolutely.
We had machinery in manufacturing plants, but nobody to operate them. If you look in a window of a barber shop, all the equipment was there for the haircuts, but there were no people there to provide that service. It's the people, and we relied on grocery store employees, nurses, doctors, and delivery drivers to get us through. So it's the people.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we get the word out? How do we help CEOs and all of the leadership in these companies understand the importance of human capital?
I think the good news is a lot of folks are starting to get it from the standpoint that leadership matters and that these things do potentially impact business value. There's a couple other external factors that are kind of nudging it along the way. For the public companies out there, the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, has mandated certain human capital disclosures. So companies have to report on these things on their financial statements, so it'll be visible to all the investors and shareholders and potential investors. And to a lesser degree, it trickles down into those privately held businesses who want to do better.
Okay, so tell me more about that, what the SEC guidelines are around human capital.
There are a lot of folks who petitioned the SEC for more stringent guidelines. The SEC, look, they did a nice job, at least in acknowledging that there's an issue here, and they did it in the middle of a global pandemic, and I think that really sends a strong message. The flip side to that is the requirements are kind of loosey-goosey at this point, but there's an expectation that they're going to continue to evolve.
Right, and I think setting the expectation out there is so important, because if you don't have an expectation, you can't rise to it. So having those conversations are so important. When you wrote your book, The New ROI, the first one, what was behind that? You talked about how you wrote an article and it showed up. What did you find? What are some of the key points?
Yeah, so I guess the why is what you're asking for, like why did I even go down this path, right? So I was a single dad for a decade or so, and I had the opportunity to work for some people that were just fantastic leaders. They led with empathy. They understood what my circumstance was, and I would walk through fire for them, honestly. I mean, they respected what my circumstance was, and I wanted to make sure that they saw that their trust in me and their faith in me was warranted. So above and beyond, discretionary effort, right?
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to work for some other folks who, frankly, didn't quite get it. They'd roll their eyes. Oh, great! You got to leave at 3 o'clock. Must be nice.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got to go home and pick up a sick kid, and never understanding what my night is going to look like. So I understood kind of firsthand what employee engagement really felt like, because they didn't really get the extraordinary effort after that.
I understand that completely. I've been a single mom for 8.5 years of 3, and I remember back when I was a teacher. And I had 3 kids at 3 different schools, and I would have to leave for one of them, and the principal gave me a lot of flack. And as soon as I possibly could, I resigned, and because it just was not an environment that supported me and my family at a time when I needed it the most, as a new single mom of 3 kids. So I understand that completely. Thank you so much. We're going to pause right here and take a commercial break, and we'll be right back with Dave Bookbinder on The Next Level.
Hi, I'm Bob Hocherdel from Kings Road Brewing Company. I'm here to tell you about a brand new show on RVN television called Cooking with the King. Each week, we're going to taste and sample some of the best beers the Kings Road Brewing Company has to offer. And we're going to talk to area chefs and restaurant owners as we pair our beer with their signature dishes. We're going to teach you how to cook and eat like a king. Cheers.
A stroke can be easy to detect. A loved one can't speak, perhaps they can't move. But there's another sign of a stroke that many of us can't see. It's called spatial neglect, and it can occur during or after a stroke, causing distorted visual movements. Fortunately, there's a solution by using optical prism technology during rehabilitation. If you or a loved one have experienced a stroke, ask your doctor about spatial neglect. Spatial neglect. See the whole picture at KesslerFoundation.org.
Are you burned out, disenfranchised, disengaged, extremely distracted? Do you feel that you're lost in semantics, over-leveraged, overwhelmed? My name is Lisa Fratelli, and I have a show on RVN TV, always streaming. The name of the show is The Neuroscience of Wealth and Well-Being. The intention of this show is to explain how you can get back to homeostasis, flow states, creativity. It's highly correlated with happiness and well-being. So you can get out of overwhelm, get out of burnout, not feel distracted, and get back to your life. You will hear from experts who will get you back on track so you can enjoy your life again. RVN TV, we're always streaming.
Are you part of the
Welcome back to The Next Level with Julie Hruska, and we have a wonderful guest, Dave Bookbinder here, the author of the new ROI Series. And we were just talking about how I resigned from my job as a teacher because I didn't feel supported as a single mother, and I needed to be there for my children. And so those are kind of the unintended consequences that leaders don't consider when they're interacting with their employees. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, and look, with that unintended consequence comes a cost. And a lot of folks use, there's an employee turnover calculator that a lot of folks in the human resources world use. And we talk about the costs to recruit, hire, train, integrate, learning curve, all that stuff. And the reality is that the real cost to replace somebody is between 1 and 3 times their salary. So there's real dollars in there every time you lose someone, and that's the hard dollars. And we talked about the soft stuff, like the institutional knowledge that walks out the door.
Yeah.
And when you lose a rock star, that's even more painful.
Well, yeah, I mean, at that time, I was the most requested teacher at that school. I was a semi-finalist for a Disney Teacher of the Year award. I had a lot of things going on. I was a really incredible teacher.
You were a rock star.
But I was going through some challenging times, and imagine if they would have come alongside me and said, how can we best support you?
Yeah, I know what that feels like, and it's a huge difference maker. Like I said, I'd walk through fire for those leaders that led with empathy.
Yeah. And so when you're working with a company and you're consulting about human capital, how do you help people understand the unintended consequences and the real cost?
Well, the idea here is I'm trying to connect the dots so that people can understand that even if they're not really keen on the woo-woo aspect of creating a great culture, if you will, and you know what I mean by that,
I do.
Right?
People do it all the time to me. They're like, oh, that's nice, Julie. They're a little bit patronizing to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're like, oh, it's nice you want to talk about high-performing cultures.
Right. My mission is to help them understand that it really impacts the enterprise value. So even if they're not inclined to do the right thing because they want to be helping employees in that aspect of it, if they're just totally selfish about it, we can at least agree that if we do these things, there's enough evidence that points to the fact that we can increase the value of your business if we turn the needles to the right direction on the human capital pieces. It's demonstrated. The companies that are listed as the great places to work, or the Just companies from Just Capital, or the Harbor Capital Appreciation Fund, HAPPY, which is based on something called the human capital factor that my friends at Irrational Capital developed. There's hard data that points to this correlation. You can predict which companies are going to outperform based on how they treat their people, and it's an investable strategy. So this isn't just me saying, oh, do the right thing.
Right, well, it's the same. That's what I try to help people see. Creating a high-performing culture is not just a buzzword. It's actually really important for the bottom line. So even the most callous leaders can understand that if you treat your employees well, you're going to make more money. It's very simple.
Yeah.
And yet we still have these leaders that will come into companies, like we talked about with Twitter, and they just think they're going to kind of wrangle people in. And it's like my way or the highway. What do you see happening to those type of companies in today's world?
I think it's inevitable that they'll underperform, period, underperform. I mean, it's already evidenced by what I just alluded to with those other types of indices, the great places to work, the good companies in the Fortune, and so forth. They are all outperforming their peers, and they're demonstrating it and they're reporting it. And anybody that wants to emulate that kind of good corporate citizenship behavior has the roadmap. They can see what other folks are doing. It's disclosed, it's available, and they can emulate that and I believe achieve similar results.
I wholeheartedly agree, and that's why I have shifted so much from my one-on-one coaching to working with executive teams and really working with them to create that culture that does trickle down so everyone feels a part of something bigger than themselves. It's so important, and I'm so passionate about it because you see the benefit extensions. It's not just about the company and the bottom line. It's about those families, those communities. Really, companies have such an opportunity to do so much more than they even realize by investing in their human capital.
Yeah, they can help all their stakeholders create a great environment where people want to work. The employees are evangelists for the companies. People are going to want to come work there. They're not going to want to leave. So you're not going to incur the greater cost of turnover. And oh, by the way, in the process, I can assure you, you're going to be increasing the value of your company.
Exactly, and that's what you specialize in.
Yes.
So when we talk about the next level, and which is the title of the show, and what I do with clients, I help them go from point A to point B, moving to the next level of success, whether it's an individual or a company. When you think about how leaders can take their lives to the next level and lead with integrity, what are 3 tips you have for success?
Well, I can only tell you what's worked for me,
or
what I think has worked for me. And it's kind of 3-pronged, and because I know what you do, I kind of anticipated you might ask me something like this. The first one's an inside job, and I think the first thing that leaders need to do, certainly I needed to do, was stop listening to the voices in my head that said you can't, that you're not worthy, the limiting beliefs piece. And I've had guests on my show talking about crushing limiting beliefs, and it fundamentally works in your subconscious, and whether you even are aware of it or not, I'm not good enough, I'm not good looking enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not worthy enough, whatever. All that crap gets in the way from you being successful. So that's number 1.
Yes, let's stay there for a moment. When I work with clients, that is the number 1 thing that we have to do. We have to excavate those limiting beliefs first. And so many people don't realize they're running the story in their head. Like they come up against a challenge, or like with leadership in a company, they come up against some issue with other employees, and it's like, that's your go-to, but why?
Yeah, many CEOs I talked to even said one of their limiting beliefs, their subconscious limitation, was that they felt that they needed to know everything. And wow, how empowering it is for them to realize that you're allowed to say, you know what, I don't have all the answers. I'm a human being, but I'm going to get the answers, and I'm going to work with you to make it happen.
And that's the spirit of collaboration, which goes back to human capital and making sure that everyone feels part of something bigger, which is amazing. So beyond overcoming limiting beliefs, what else do you see?
Number 2 would be, again, this worked for me, is approach relationships from a go-giver perspective. What kind of value can you add and create in a conversation or a situation? Don't come into relationships, networking or what have you, with the mindset of what can I take, what can I get. I don't look at the scoreboard. I'm not one of those quid pro quo people where, if I do something for you, you have to do something for me. If it's beneficial for you and the person I'm introducing you to, that's awesome. And that's enough for me. I don't need to know that you're going to necessarily come back with something. If you do, that's great, but that's not what's on the top of my mind. So I'd say the go-giver mindset, to quote Bob Berg, is number 2 for me.
Yeah, that's really important in leadership, right? To have that spirit of how can I help my employees when we're talking about human capital, how can I best support you? Which is what we were talking about when we were single parents, and
Yeah.
we needed that, and you had someone that supported you, and I had someone that didn't, and you really see the difference and how it
100%.
affected us paths forward. We both then took from that we want to be better,
Right.
right? And we want to lead by example. And then what is your third tip for achieving success?
Yeah, the third one, in all honesty, and to stay on brand, is empower your people. You hired them, let them do what you brought them in to do, give them that great experience that we talked about earlier in the first segment, and let them shine. And they'll take a lot of burdens off of your plate, let you do what you do best, let them do what they do best, and give them a chance to grow.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's been a huge key to success for me.
When you think about empowerment, who has been someone in your life that's really empowered you?
An old friend and mentor to this day, dear friend of mine from a long time ago. We've worked together hand in hand probably for 2/3 of my career, if I did the math right in my head.
Really? And do you want to tell us who that is, or tell a little more about?
He's one of the leaders who led with empathy. His name is Ray, and I met him early in my career. We took a liking to one another, great friends, and as he rose up into the leadership ranks, I was there to help him and did what I could to support his career, and then the roles sort of flipped, and like I said, we've been great friends.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much, Dave, for being here today.
Oh no, we're out of time already?
We are, I know. It's gone so fast. We'll have to have you back for sure. Before we go, how can people learn more about you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on LinkedIn if anybody wants to have a conversation, and they can always find me at newroi.com, which is my website. And as Julie mentioned at the beginning of the show, I do host a program called Behind the Numbers, and you can check that out here at RVN TV, and you can find it anywhere where you stream your podcasts.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And these are Dave's books, The New ROI and The New ROI, Going Behind the Numbers, so check those out. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in to The Next Level with Julie Hruska. And I really want you to make sure that when you're watching this show, you take it to heart and you think about it so you can take your life to the next level and achieve the highest levels of success. Thank you.